Okay, so why should we be talking about and considering our clients' menstrual cycles as providers? Now, regardless if we're providing physical health or mental health support, this is important. Now, I'm going to add this as an asterisk because I struggle due to the fact that too many medical providers dismiss women and blame everything on your uterus, right? Like anything that's wrong, the first question out of their mouth is, could you be pregnant, right? And so we tend to blame everything on the uterus, and I'm always shocked when doctors or providers blame it on something that's not the uterus, and then it's always ironic because then it is the uterus in those times. But I think too that too many mental health providers never even consider how their clients' menstrual cycles are impacting them, even though it's probably impacting them every day of their cycle. And we need, as providers, to put that in context, and by that I mean whatever our clients are bringing us, to drop that in the context of the menstrual cycle. So I believe there's a balance of not blaming everything on a client's ovaries and actually bringing in the menstrual cycle into the conversation and into context. So I'm assuming you've watched my menstrual cycle videos, or right after this video we'll be watching the menstrual cycle videos. So I'm not going to explain what those videos already address. And I want to pull back and talk to you more provider to provider about that menstrual cycle. So if you're looking for more information on the actual menstrual cycle, go to those videos. But let's start with just some terminology. Now, I'm going to call this the uninterrupted menstrual cycle. What this means is a client who has, or a patient who has a menstrual cycle that isn't suppressed by hormonal birth control or completely stopped due to naturally being postmenopausal or due to a medically induced menopause due to a full hysterectomy. Now, a full hysterectomy means the uterus and the ovaries were removed. And a partial hysterectomy usually means that the ovaries were left. And so if your client still has ovaries, they likely still have a menstrual cycle. So this is important to kind of clarify here. And I am also going to start with a uninterrupted functional menstrual cycle. I say that also because there's so many things about the menstrual cycle that can go wrong. And again, I cover that in videos. I encourage you to watch those and really understand from a client's perspective and from a general public perspective of what that looks like. And with each of those videos, I'm going to have a professional-only conversation video around that too. But let's just start with an uninterrupted functional menstrual cycle. So normal. And just that, we have a lot happening in the body, from hormonally to inflammation to like structural changes in the brain, like I talked about in those menstrual cycle videos. And so to really, when clients sit down in front of us who qualify as uninterrupted and functional menstrual cycle, we should be knowing where they're falling. Because let's say they're anxious or depressed, which are really common things, right, in the mental health world, but also anxious and depressed if you're a PT and you have a client who is sitting in front of you with a lot of anxiety. If you're an MD or if you're an NP or a PA, right, their clients will be, and their patients will be sitting in front of you with anxiety and depression. And if you don't know where they're at in the menstrual cycle, then you're not viewing them really three-dimensionally. You're really only viewing them one-dimensionally of what they're coming to you with. And we should be the experts. Now, if you're a mental health provider, you're seeing these people a lot more frequently than your physical health provider counterparts. So even more so, we need to be talking about this and having these conversations. So let's say they're depressed or they're anxious. Where are they at in the menstrual cycle? Because if this depression and anxiety is showing up in the follicular phase, I'm also going to be thinking, is that high testosterone, high estrogen drive, to be like sexually active, to being highly motivated, and all these things that those two hormones provide, is that leaving the person sitting in front of me, my client, feeling anxious, feeling on edge? If they're depressed and then they're in their luteal phase, Of course, right? Because in our economy, which is a capitalistic economy, we value productivity. And in that luteal phase, we're not productive, right? Women are not productive. The body is designed to sort of kind of like, like prepare for pregnancy. So there's this, sleepiness, there's this lower motivation, lower energy. It's like a kind of like a winter phase. Macy Hill has a book out there where she kind of talks about that, but I really like this kind of like hunkering down phase. And we're not going to be as motivated. We're not going to be as driven. And so I'm going to be looking for those pieces to see if, hey, are you in the luteal phase? Of course you're going to be feeling depressed. Now, I'm not talking, they're reporting full-blown major depressive disorder for months on end. I'm talking when they're feeling down, they're feeling, right, they're coming off of that follicular phase going, I'm a loser, I am hopeless, or I can't stay motivated. Like conversations and, phrases like that where if they don't understand what's happening in their bodies with those hormones, they're gonna feel like there's something wrong with them, right? Because they should be balls to the wall, fully motivated, cranking out projects, cranking out, out things at work, being, super mom, things like that in the luteal phase just aren't there, right? And even if they are doing those things in the luteal phase, like, are they tired, right? I can't figure out why I'm so tired. Well, let's look at the cycle. So I think even in a normal menstrual cycle, there are so many deviations, fluctuations of those hormones that it's important that our clients and us as providers understand our clients through that context. Now let's jump to sort of a dysfunctional menstrual cycle. There are a lot happening when there's dysfunctional menstrual cycles, and I'm going to have videos on each one. And so this is really kind of an introduction of why we need to be talking about menstrual cycles. But I'm kind of going to point to the providers that see clients and patients more often. So I'm thinking like therapists, both mental health and physical therapists, OTs, things like that, of having the conversation when clients say, they're experiencing their period. And you ask them, do you experience a lot of pain on your period? And they're like, well, it's the normal pain. What the hell does that mean, right? So normal pain, what is normal pain? How I measure it is normal menstrual pain should be something that could be, if needed, treated with a couple of Advil, okay? So let's go big, 800 milligrams, so that's 4 over-the-counter Advil. If that makes you puts you to a place where you can function, that's probably normal period pain, right? Period pain should not interrupt school, should not interrupt work, should not interrupt, if I can speak now, interrupt a person's life. And so many of us get messaging both from providers but also from our mothers or grandmothers or aunts, right, that periods should be painful. That's to be expected. But what if they were given that same message and don't understand that the pain they're experiencing isn't normal period pain, right? And so if your client, patient, whatever, is describing these things to you, I encourage you to stop and have a conversation, right? And so if you feel like this is outside your scope because you're a mental health provider, you can just ask a couple of questions of what they mean by that and then refer them to resources, refer them to, I say Google searches, but really what I mean is social media searches, because Google will just get you to like the Cleveland Clinic and the Mayo Clinic and these very, kind of like sterile websites versus the lived experience that socials, like Reddit and Instagram and TikTok really provide. So I encourage my clients to search for these things on their social media pages. But the same with normal bleeding. If you're not in the world of women's reproductive health, you may never have been told what normal menstrual bleeding looks like, okay? And with this it's a little harder to define than normal pain, because objectively, it's about 80 milligrams. 80 milliliters, which, think of it like a chicken's egg. That's about the volume of normal blood loss in a menstrual cycle. But who's measuring that, right? We're not, unless you're using a menstrual cup that's easier to gauge how much blood and tissue is coming out during a period, most people can't measure that. So I'm asking questions like, how often are you changing your menstrual product? Know what your client's using for menstrual product. Are they using menstrual cups? Are they using tampons? Are they using pads? Are they using underwear, right? Understand how often they're having to change those things, right? Or how often they're having to go to the bathroom to address those things. If they're changing a pad every hour, that is very heavy bleeding. That is not normal bleeding, and I want you to be confident in saying that. Now, if they're changing a tampon, I'd say twice a day, and then maybe one, overnight they change it, and then twice a day, okay, maybe, right? But if they're changing a heavy super tampon 4 or 5 times a day, I would say that's not normal. And if that is their normal, having those conversations and encouraging them to look at and search up things like fibroids, things like endo, same with the pain, things like endometriosis, fibroids, these are all things that cause pain. And if they're reading stories from other people who are experiencing these things and they resonate with those, to be able to find providers who can they get diagnosed from, or at least start having these conversations. But when it comes to mental health, I think our arena really is PMS. So when we think of normal PMS, so 90% of people who experience an uninterrupted menstrual cycle experience PMS symptoms. What is PMDD, though, right? PMDD is well within mental health scope to diagnose. Literally, we're supposed to be the ones diagnosing this hormonal disorder, which is always a fun thing. But PMDD for my clients looks a lot like rage. It looks a lot like suicidality. It looks a lot like, this emotional up and down. It looks a lot like borderline personality disorder. And so I find it interesting, and I would be super curious that those clients that were quick to diagnose with borderline, if they couldn't also be, or maybe in replace of, experiencing PMDD. If you don't know their menstrual cycle, if you see a client and they're happy-go-lucky and they're motivated one session, and then 2 weeks later when you see them, they're rageful, they want a divorce, they're having suicidal thoughts, and then 2 weeks after that they're fine again, right? That would look like borderline, right? That would look like textbook, I shouldn't say DSM, borderline of hey, this isn't, true suicidality because you're cycling in and out of it. And so I think it's important to us for us as mental health providers, if we see them in this state, this rage, anger, suicidal state, and we go, where are you at in your menstrual cycle? Again, not to dismiss it, not to blame it on their menstrual cycle, but if they're saying, I'm probably a week to 10 days prior to when my period's supposed to start. Okay, we now have data, and we're going to track it, and we're going to keep track of it. But it's not always simply in this luteal phase. I have lots of clients who struggle with that hormonal shift during ovulation too. And so they will talk about that they have 2 weeks out of a month when they can function, and they feel like a normal human being. And so it's important to understand, is this cyclical? Asking your clients these things, asking them, how long have you felt this way? Did you, witness your mom experience menstrual, cycles this way? Because we are not equipped to handle the emotional upheaval from hormones, because our society and our families rarely equip us to view this as normal and safe and teaching us and modeling to us those behaviors and those reactions to these hormones and these emotions. If anything, the best, if our families talked about it, it was a butt of a joke. And so we really need to model for our clients what that looks like and encourage them to model it for their children too, who are going to be menstruating or are menstruating. Now, so that's just uninterrupted. So whether it's dysfunctional or functional menstrual cycle, that's uninterrupted. But let's talk about hormonal birth control, because I would imagine most of your clients and patients are probably going to end up in the hormonal birth control camp. And so this is important because hormonal birth control, there is a ton of research, particularly out of Europe. There's not anything out of the U.S. because the U.S. doesn't want to study it, on the side effects of hormonal birth control, particularly depression and anxiety. And so when we have a client in front of us or a patient in front of us who's experiencing anxiety and depression and is really struggling, I want to know if they're on hormonal birth control. Because in my experience, this isn't one of those side effects that show up, instantly, right? You take the med, and after a couple of days or even a couple of weeks, you start feeling the side effect. I don't think, and I've never witnessed this in my clients, it's subtle, right? It's a real subtle shift that they usually don't connect to the birth control. And I would argue that providers don't connect to the birth control, because they'll be like, what are some things that have shifted in the last, 90 days, 6 months? They're not going to tell you birth control, because they got on the birth control probably years ago, if not a year ago, or they don't think, it's new, so it's not worth mentioning. So when you ask clients what meds they are on, make sure to explicitly ask about birth control. Because if you just list, on an intake, a question that says, what meds are you on? They're going to think of, psych meds. They're going to think of, blood pressure meds. They're not going to think of birth control that they've been on since they were 17 years old. And we do know the birth control pill has these side effects. IUDs are supposed to, at least like things like a hormonal IUD, this is different with a copper IUD, but a hormonal IUD is supposed to be different, right, than birth control. It's supposed to have less side effects. And I haven't found the research, so this is just, kind of what I'm viewing in my practice is, to me, IUDs have a very similar impact on clients, because I think a couple things. I think that stopping the menstrual cycle is impactful. I don't care how you stop it, whether it's with pills, with with IUDs, with menopause, medical or natural. It impacts a client's mood. It impacts their client's emotional regulation. It impacts a client. So even if they're like, oh, I'm on an IUD, I'm still considering what that could be doing to them, just by stopping that menstrual cycle. And then we go to peri and post menopause. So I know I sort of jumped over birth control, and I'm going to do there'll be a video on just birth control alone and how to talk to clients about that. But peri and post menopause. Perimenopause, and is kind of getting its spot right now in the socials, where we need to start looking at clients who are in their 40s and 50s, because menopause, the medical definition of menopause is you are officially in menopause when it has been 365 days since your last period. Perimenopause is probably 5 to 10 years prior to that, and now we're really having this conversation about really that 7 to 10 years prior to that, where that menstrual cycle isn't sort of a common, it's not consistent, it's not happening every month. And so there are some months we don't ovulate because of all the things that are happening, or things are getting off and wonky. And so there's a lot of things happening in perimenopause. But most importantly is mood shifts, right? Trouble focusing, trouble sleeping, brain fog, forgetfulness, anxiety, depression. These are all things that we need to be aware of, because as mental health providers and as physical health providers, if we're just kind of like chalking this up to troubles in their relationship, troubles with work, right? Kids issues, things like that, then again, we're not viewing these clients three-dimensionally and within the appropriate context. So I think it's important for us to be educated on the symptoms of perimenopause, simply because if we hear it, right, when a client starts talking, if we're already having a conversation about their menstrual cycle, and hopefully they'll be comfortable with us to start mentioning when they have missed periods, when they have wonky periods, and so we can start listening for the perimenopause symptoms and getting them to the help they need, to the resources they need, simply instead of just going, oh yeah, you're anxious, right? Because that's not helpful, right? An SSRI isn't always the most helpful thing a person can have, but I think information is, and we're in a position to give clients that information. All right, so check out those other videos on more specific conversations about specific diagnoses and experiences, but I hope this gives you sort of a eagerness or a jump start, or sort of a, I don't know what, but to really start engaging with your clients in this and being comfortable talking to your clients about this, and being comfortable being a systemic therapist and considering our clients in as many systems as we can, versus just going straight to depression, anxiety, and chalking up to those things and, probably coming off dismissive. All right, thanks, and I look forward to hearing from you.